Hello, Kristi. How are you today?
I'm well. I'm well.
Good, good. I'm
Yeah.
actually kind of sitting in an awkward spot, also sitting with my headphones. So, for those of you who are just tuning in for the first time, I usually don't wear this really fancy headgear unless I'm talking to my partner in crime, Melissa MacLeod, with whom I do this podcast a couple times a month. But so typically I don't wear these unless I'm talking to her. But today I'm in the middle of my very busy shop where there's also some construction going on. So I'm hoping that the fancy headset and the microphone will help to hone in on the sound. So I am Megan Holmes here at the Needlepoint Clubhouse in St. Louis, Missouri. And like I mentioned, my friend Melissa MacLeod and I do this Pointing It Out podcast a couple times a month. But today, I am super excited to have Kristi. Kristi, is it Larson is your last name? Are you Schroeder Larson?
So Schrader is my maiden
Sure.
name, so I just do Kristi Schrader Larson.
Okay. I
Um,
should have
yeah,
asked you that before we got on here. But anyway,
that's
so
okay.
so this is Kristi. And the more important part is that Kristi's business name is Initial K Studio, correct?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
And Kristi has a very exciting needlepoint story to tell, I think, because it was actually sort of grown out of a different passion for crafting. And so I think what I'd love to do is just kind of start at the beginning, if that's okay with you.
Yeah,
Um,
sure,
so
sure.
you let's do this. So when did you start actually needlepointing? And I guess what better question, some designers don't actually needlepoint, but do you actually stitch?
I do, I do. I
Okay.
stitch. Yes,
Okay.
yes.
And you
I try and
started
stitch every
stitching.
day.
Oh, I wish I could fit that in every
Try,
day.
try, try.
I know, I know. So you started stitching when?
I started stitching when I had my oldest in 2018, and Um, he went through, we realized at 3 months old the hard way that he was allergic to milk when we gave him
Oh,
formula.
oh my
And
gosh.
he went into anaphylaxis and we had to go to the hospital.
Oh my God.
It was in the ambulance, it was a huge thing. Like the whole staff, they were like, this never happened. And I was like, well, it's happening. So we found out from that episode that he was, and he was, let me back up. So I had him at 40. So I was an older geriatric, whatever. I'm not gonna say geriatric because I don't feel geriatric.
I'm
Um,
saying, but I was a geriatric pregnancy also. So,
yeah, yeah. And so he was born full term, but he was in the 1 percentile. So the whole time my pediatrician was like, he needs to start gaining weight. I was breastfeeding him, but he wasn't ingesting enough, and so she suggested supplementation with the formula. So that was the goal. And then the anaphylaxis happened, and then we tried a hypoallergenic formula, and he started to have a reaction. So we were both like, okay, I have to breastfeed him, and I couldn't do it because he wasn't ingesting. So I had to pump
oh,
exclusively around the clock for his
oh
entire first year of life. And
my gosh.
I remember telling my husband, like, I am going crazy. I was going crazy. And so I started stitching. I found some needlepoint kits online. Emily Peacock, she's a
Yes,
uh,
British.
British designer, and I
Mhm.
loved her. I loved her design style. That is the first thing I look at, is the design style of a piece, and I loved her aesthetic. And so I ordered some of her big, and they were cross stitch, which I didn't realize, but I was like, whatever, I'm just gonna do it.
So her things are Victorian cross stitch, right? Not or are they actual cross stitch?
I
Do you know?
think they're, well, because you're stitching it on like a 14, 15
Hmm.
mesh canvas, like a
Hmm.
needlepoint canvas.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
so yeah, so I stitched two pillows that were like this big for my niece and nephew that year, because that's
Which
all I
ones
was
did
doing
you
was like,
do? She's
I
got
did the
those.
I did the crab and the prawn.
Okay.
Um,
The ones I'm thinking of are those cool ones of the people. Like I think there's
yes,
Virginia Woolf and I can't
yes,
remember who else, but those
yeah,
are very cool. So
yeah,
yes, yes.
yeah,
Okay. So excuse me. So go ahead. So you did that. So what a great way to keep your hands and your mind busy, of course,
yeah.
as we all know.
It saved my sanity. I think I was definitely the most excited one at my son's first birthday. Because I was like,
Yes.
no more, I'm done. So that's kind of how I started to get into it. And at that point, I had my own business on the quilting side. of
Yeah,
things.
so let's go back there because as I alluded to a couple minutes ago, I knew that you had been a quilter, which is what inspires a lot of your designs. But so talk about, I don't know anything about that business. Was that
Yeah.
patterns?
Yeah, so my background, I was a graphic designer in the
Oh,
corporate
okay.
world for like over 12 years. And the modern quilting movement started happening, I want to say like, I don't know, 2010. I don't know, like, gosh, that
Mm-hmm.
was 10 years ago. I don't know, that time it seems so long ago, but it wasn't. So I was working full time. I got into quilting because I wanted to do something creative when I got home, but I
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to sit in front of a computer. And there was an amazing fabric shop in Dallas that I went to, and she had night classes for us to take. So I kind of fell in love with the fabric that this shop owner, Callie, had. She had such a really good eye for fabric and
Mm-hmm.
color. And my mom is a quilter and my mom's a needle pointer. And she tried to get me to do both of those when I was growing up. And I like did not want to have anything to do with it. So anyway, so I stumbled into it. I started making quilts for friends. And then I was really burnt out at my job. I was working in Neiman Marcus in their marketing department. It was one of
Mm-hmm.
their senior graphic designers. And I was like, I'm done. I did not enjoy going to work, and it was Neiman Marcus, like
Yeah, right,
fashion and art and clothes. Like,
right.
I was one of those things where I was like, this is my dream job, and I'm absolutely miserable.
But I can't do it. Yes, I get that.
I
I get
can't.
that.
So yeah, so I quit and started doing commission for people for quilts, and then
Oh.
Callie, the shop owner, and I collaborated on a quilt design because this wholesale fabric company was coming out with like 32 new colors, and she wanted a quilt to showcase all the colors. And so I designed something and then released it, and then the quilt company got a hold of me and they were like, we love this pattern, would you be interested in turning this into a quilt pattern so people can buy it?
Oh, how
And I was like,
interesting.
sure, I can do that. And then I had to like turn around and figure out how to do it.
Well,
um,
so that's a quick question. So I know that in Needlepoint, a lot of the designers, including possibly yourself, use was it Mac Stitch? Or there's a lot of different design
yes,
programs, right?
yes,
But
yes.
how is a quilt pattern designed? I don't know anything
I
about that.
So for me, I use the Adobe suite. So there's like Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign because
Okay.
that's what I used in my corporate world. So I would do all the design work in InDesign. I mean in Illustrator. So that's like a vector-based program where you can really like play around with it. It's a very good design program for putting things together. And then InDesign is like the publication program where
Oh,
you lay everything out. So I
mhm.
would do the design work and the illustration work in Illustrator and then move it over to InDesign to write the pattern basically.
Gotcha. So again, this is me being a total dummy about quilting, but I hopefully other people don't know a lot about quilting and might learn a little
Yeah.
something too. So when you're designing, and I'm trying not to use my hands too much because we've also, I forgot to say at the top, welcome to those people who are listening to us on the audio
Yeah.
platforms. And
Yeah.
so I try to make sure that if I'm a listener, then I'm getting the same experience. So you lay out like shapes and
I
then do you
do.
just create measurements for a
So
full?
so if that's the there's so much math involved in quilting, and
Okay,
like
yeah.
I mean there's a ridiculous amount, and I was not a strong math person
Same.
uh at all. So um for quilting, it's because you depending on what your design is like, you have to pick it apart to figure out how you're going to put it back together. Like that is, as a designer, as a pattern designer, quilt pattern
Hmm.
designer,
Hmm.
that is my job, is to I design a quilt. At least this is how my mind works. I design a pattern and then I look at it and I'm like, okay, how am I going to break this up so people can put it back together? That is the whole process of a quilt pattern designer, is that you are the one figuring out the instruction and you have to make it as concise and clear as possible.
Got it.
So there are some foundations in quilting, like you've got your quilt, like the half square triangle quilt block. That's a very popular quilt block. And then From there, you've got flying geese. There's all these different construction methods of different blocks. So you kind of just have to figure out what base you're going to use for your design in order for it to come to fruition.
So then on top of that, you're using color and
Yes.
making sure that the color plays with the pattern.
Yes. Yes.
So do you feel like designing needlepoint canvas is anything like designing quilt patterns?
No, it's a hell of a lot easier.
Well, I was actually thinking the same thing. I mean, it is on a grid. And so when you want to create shapes like circles or letters, there is not necessarily math involved, but there's definitely some configuration stitching.
You gotta have it. You've got to have a design eye for it. I think it's just different. It's different. It's not as labor intensive. I can create like 20 designs on a needlepoint canvas when it would take me like the time frame they would take me to knock out 10 designs on a needlepoint canvas would be like one quilt. And that's like because it's a lot of labor on the quilting side. You need to make your own quilt to make sure that your measurements are correct, your instructions are correct. Then it's like you send out your pattern to get tested. So other people who process information differently, it's clear to them. Like, because there's visual people, there's people who would rather just read an entire paragraph.
Yep.
I got to put all of that together. So anyway, I loved the quilting when I was in it. And then I started being interested in needlepoint.
So my guess is, and again, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but my thought is that when you were pumping, you needed something that was a little smaller and a little more like,
yes,
you could hold it 100%. Up and you could work it and a little less brain testing because also 100%. By the way, you had a newborn and you were sleep deprived and all of those things too. So
that definitely played into my to start considering needlepoint, the needlepoint side of my business, because I remember telling my husband, like, I was like, I had 2 patterns that I released, I think when my son was 3 months old, and I had already done a lot of the work before he was born, but like, it was really hard for me to sit down to actually like finish it and do the refinement and the editing on my pattern. And I remember telling my husband, I was like, this is not sustainable. Like, I remember telling him, like, this will not be sustainable, because I was taking care of my son full time. So like, I had my business and I was taking care of, and I remember telling my husband, like, I was like, I'm just going to I'm pausing my business, which I did not want to do, but for my health and sanity, I had to. And then I started the Emily's cross stitch canvases. And then the idea was kind of percolating in the back about needlepoint, but not really, because I kind of was so focused on my son. But yeah, that's the thing. Quilting it's not just, there's so many moving pieces to it, because you have to cut the fabric, and then you sew some fabric together, and then you go back to your table and you have to trim it or cut it again. And there's so many moving parts to it that when you're doing a quilt, you need like 4 hours of uninterrupted time. And I did not have that. I did not have that with my son.
That's right. Well, most moms don't have that, even if you were in even a more restrictive kind of situation with his needs. So that's wild. So needlepoint became something that was easy for you to pick up and kind of work on. And so then as you're doing this, you're thinking, I sort of like the patterns I've already created for quilting. Yeah. And then was that sort of, take me through that process in your brain of how you got from realizing that your quilts patterns could work in needlepoint.
Yeah. So that's it's kind of a long story, a good story, but a long story. I started thinking about it, and then I got pregnant with my second.
Okay.
So my boys are 21 months apart.
Oh my word.
So, yeah, I mean, being a geriatric, my doctor basically on my yearly checkup was like, "Do you want to have a second child?" I was like, "Yes, of course." She's like, "You need to start trying now." Like, and luckily, we got pregnant like a month later with my second. So I was pregnant with him. I was thinking about it, but I didn't really. I was thinking about it, and I was looking at my patterns, and I was like, "Okay, it was percolating in the back of my mind, but I really wasn't focused on it." And then I had my second, and he was 3 weeks early. It was May of 2020, so it was the middle of COVID. And thankfully it was COVID, because we got to the hospital, and we live outside of Austin. At the time, we were living in Austin, so the hospital normally in traffic was like 30 to 45 minutes away. And because it was COVID, my husband got there in 15 minutes, and my son was born 20 minutes later.
Oh my
It
goodness.
was nuts. It was nuts. No time for drugs, no time for anything.
Oh
But
man.
unfortunately,
You wear that badge of
unfortunately,
honor.
oh my God, not my choice. I mean, to the moms who choose to do that, you guys are amazing. That was not my choice. That's all I'm gonna say. But unfortunately, after my son was born, I had complications, and what happened is that my placenta did not want to come out. It could not come
Oh
out, and so
no.
they had to. The doctor wheeled me back into the OR. Basically, right after my son was born, he was safe. He was fine. He was great. He was in like good health. They had to do a DNC with me awake. She couldn't put me under, and so I got all the drugs then. But I remember like the whole thing. It was not pleasant.
Oh, that's terrifying.
It
I'm
was bad. And
sorry.
then that happened. Then everything was fine. She thought she got everything out. She gave me her cell phone number. And this was like after we're back in the hospital room with my husband, and she gave her cell phone number to me, and she told my husband that if anything seems off, call me. Do not hesitate. And so we got discharged, went home. A week later, I started bleeding, and I had a really high fever. And so we
Oh
called, and she
no.
was like, come straight back to the hospital. My mom was there at that time, so she dropped me off at the ER. She said, check in through the ER, and my team will come down and get you. And then she went back up and did a second DNC because she just thought there was still parts of the placenta in my uterus. And then I got discharged again, went back home. And then it was a week later to the day. So it was 2 weeks postpartum. I'm feeding my son at like 4 in the morning in the bed, and I basically started bleeding out and soaked the sheets. Went to the bathroom. I passed a blood clot bigger than my fist.
Oh
Called my
my
doctor again.
gosh.
And she was like, come straight to the hospital. And I had to get I think it was like, I don't know, 6 or 7 in the morning. And this is COVID, the very beginning of
Ugh,
COVID. So we got a neighbor to take me because my mom left like 2 days prior. So my husband was by himself with
with two
both
kids.
with two kids. So a neighbor took me, dropped me off the hospital. They did an MRI, and I had a huge mass at the top of my uterus. And long story
Gosh.
short, I had placenta accretia. So the placenta had attached itself to the top of my uterus, and it was
Uh,
growing out on the other side. Like it was, and
holy moly.
it was basically because of my doctor. I am here because she was so reactive to everything that was happening to me, and
Holy cow.
um, so
Doesn't
it
that
was,
just make you so grateful for modern medicine and technology and,
yeah, yeah.
wow.
So they told me, they're like, you have to have an emergency hysterectomy. We're wheeling you up in 30 minutes. And she came in and she was like, this is happening. We have to do this. But she's like, you get to keep your ovaries. And I was like, oh, great.
Okay.
I was like, she's
Thanks.
like, you're so calm. Yeah. She's like, you're so calm. And I'm like, well, I just want to go home. Like, I just want to get better and go home to my boys. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so the nurses were great because this wasn't COVID. So I was there by myself the whole time.
Oh
Um,
my goodness.
and the nurses advocated for my husband to be there when I got out of surgery, and they let him. And so I think I got out of surgery, I don't know, at like 7 o'clock. I don't know what time it was, but my husband was able to
Sure.
come for a little bit.
Oh,
And so then he left. And then the next morning, the lab tech guy came in, check her blood work. And he took one look at me and he was like, honey, I've been doing this long enough. He's like, you need a blood transfusion because I had
oh
lost so much blood.
my
So
gosh.
it was like a
Holy
very
moly.
crazy
So can we
experience.
suffice it to say that you did not have to nurse your second child because you weren't
I,
even home to do it? You put
I
in your
did not,
time with baby number one.
I know, I know. Well, unfortunately
I know
for
that's
my
not funny,
second,
but I was just thinking, oh my goodness.
yeah, well, for my second, I had to pump. I pumped until we were like, okay, let's make sure the formula is safe for him. And it was. So I pumped until I could switch him
Oh,
over.
sure, sure. So
So,
during all this time, so how does needlepoint come back into this?
so Needlepoint comes back in because from that time, it was so traumatic. I started stitching samples based on my quilt design.
So you were
because
looking at the quilts and you were just stitching like freehand kind of? You hadn't painted them?
I did not paint them. I looked at a piece of paper, like I printed out a piece of paper and kind of
Like
sketched it out a
traced
little
it?
bit.
Oh, cool. Cool.
So that's kind of how I figured it out. And I basically, because my doctor was like, you need to talk to a therapist, like because it
All
was,
this
I mean, I
trauma.
basically almost died. Um, and I was like, yeah, I'd love to. And I tried to do the Zoom thing with the therapist. And I remember being like, this is not working because I could hear my boys playing in the other room. And I'm like, I knew what had happened. I knew how traumatic it was, but I compartmentalized all of it because I was like, I don't have the capacity to process this the right way with a therapist because I needed to be elsewhere in order to do that, not be in my home.
Sure.
And so I just started stitching the whole time. And I just remember like sitting in my bed and just like tears streaming down my face and just
Aw.
stitching because I had to process it. That was the only way for me that I realized I could process all the information, I guess, if
Well,
that makes sense.
processing
So,
that, and then also your hormones are just so out of whack at that point too. Like
oh my God.
you can't even
Yeah.
think clearly, after being postpartum and the hysterectomy and all that. You can't think
Yeah.
clearly when you're having all of that brain fog either. So
Yeah.
I'm
Oh
so
no,
glad you had.
I was a hot mess for a long
Oh,
time. For a very
well,
long
speaking
time.
of
I
which,
know, right?
so hold on. So I said speaking of which, because those of you who know Kristi or know a lot of her designs, she has a canvas that says hot mess, and I love it. It's one of my very favorite canvases on the planet. It's just so great because as
Yeah.
a mom and as a small business owner and as a woman, as a sister, as a all the things, I just feel like I'm a hot mess half the time, and I think that's
Yeah.
hilarious. But
Yes. Yeah.
so my guess is that hot mess was not part of the quilting. You probably didn't write
No,
hot mess on a quilt.
no,
Um,
no, no, not at all.
so I have a couple questions related to the quilting though, back to that, because so are you still a quilt designer, or are your designs still out in the world being?
My designs are still, yes, my quilt patterns are still out in the world. And I published a book, which I don't think I have. I meant to grab it. I published a book in 2017 called Southwest Modern that has 18 projects, and it's kind of travel inspired. So the quilts are photographed in the places that inspired me to design them. So
Oh,
it's
how
like
cool.
West Texas and New Mexico. Um, so yeah, I have my book published, and then my quilt patterns are out at quilt shops. But I still take commissions, so I still have some clients that over the years that have reached out to me to make quilts for their families as their families get bigger.
My
And
goodness.
I love them dearly. I love those clients. They're so wonderful to work with. So I still do commissions, but I'm not actively creating new
New
designs.
patterns. Is that something
Yeah.
you think you'll go back to, or you're not sure?
No, I'm not going to go back to
No, you're not going back. All right. So
that.
quilting has had its chapter in your life, and now we're
Yes.
on to needlepoint. And so you
Yes.
you were inspired to kind of stitch some of the shapes that
Yes.
from your quilt patterns. I'm sorry, I'm not saying all the right words.
Yeah.
But
That's okay.
and so you were kind of doing that freehand as you were sort of recovering from this traumatic experience you had. And then when did you say, maybe I'll try to paint, or had you ever painted anything before?
I never painted a canvas. But I reached out once I made the decision that I was like, okay, I'm going to switch over to needlepoint and just give this a try and see how my designs do. Um, I reached out to Tess of Hello Tess
Oh,
Designs because she had been following me on Instagram and made a few comments, and so I DM'd her to be like, hey, can I pick your brain? I'd love to like jump on a quick phone call, like whatever works for you.
uh-huh.
And she is such an amazing human. I love her so dearly. I would not be here if it wasn't for
Indeed.
her because she really did take me under her wing, and she gave me the lay of the land on how the needlepoint industry works and the painting studios and everything else. And she was so great because I had so many questions.
Sure,
And she
sure.
really walked me through all of that process. And then I was like, oh, I can do this. Like, I bought the acrylics, I got a blank canvas and started painting. And I was like, oh yeah, I can do this. Like there's so many different things because for quilting, you've got these wholesale fabric companies that have all these different colors. They actually have like fabric samples on like really small cards.
Uh-huh.
So that equates to me as like DMC when I'm
Sure,
designing
sure.
because you've got all the floss and the color card. It's the same process. for
Oh,
designing. And I was like, oh, this is, I can do this. This is not rocket science. So,
so one thing that I forgot to mention at the top when we just first started talking is where exactly, so you're in your studio, obviously. For those people who are watching this on the audio
yes.
platform, they can see that Kristi's sitting in an office or a studio with her, some of her samples and things. But where actually are you located in the country?
So I'm outside of Austin.
So
Uh,
your closest needlepoint shop then would be
is in Austin is the Needleworks.
Needleworks. Okay.
Yes.
Also the home
Yes.
of Vermilana for those people who,
Yes.
those shop owners or people who love that thread, they distribute Vermilana now. So we get that
Yeah.
from them.
And I
And
used
so,
to, I worked there one day a week for a couple of years, but I just had to stop doing it for family stuff. But I
of
love
course.
Annette and Allison. They're fabulous. And it's a
Yeah.
great store.
And how far? So you're an hour from them or less?
45 minutes.
Okay. Okay.
Which is nothing in Texas. That's like.
So did you know about, yeah, right. Especially with all the open space. Yes, for sure. So did you know about that shop before you talked to Tess, or was the whole local needlepoint shop thing even on your radar?
I don't think I didn't really know, but I knew it was there because my mom is a needlepointer and like she has a canvas bag from them from 30 years ago. Like my mom she went through her stash the other day and I was like, Mom, I can't believe you. She actually gave me her PD nativity. She had bought 2 sets and she gave me her second set because she stitched the first set. And I remember her stitching it when I was like 10 years old. I vividly remember her stitching the nativity set when I was growing up. And then she found the extra set. So I knew it was there, but I'd forgotten about it. And then once Tess and I were chatting, and then my mom was like, oh, you do know Needleworks is in Austin? And I was like, yeah, I do. So then I went over there to start, buying my supplies.
Sure. And also seeing like what else was on the market and what else was kind of going on in the world. By the way, I do have a question because I am a fangirl of JVN and Jonathan Van Ness, and that's his local needlepoint shop. Do you know that?
Yeah. Yes.
Have you ever run into him?
I have never run into him. I wish.
I doubt he's there very often.
Yeah.
So fun fact, he did my hair for a while. He was in St. Louis and did my hair. He also did my husband's hair for our wedding.
Oh, that's so fun.
Awesome. But I've been desperate to like run into him ever since because he's a needlepointer. So just a shout out for that.
Yeah.
I just thought that was a fun fact for everybody. But anyway, so you were going to Needleworks and then kind of just started painting. I'm guessing what was equivalent to the quilt patterns. And then where did it go from there? I mean, there are other things in your line that in fact are not quilt patterns. So where have you gotten inspiration and like how did that kind of take off?
I mean, I started kind of doing my quilt patterns translating to that. I released it to market, released it out in the wild. And I was like, okay, we're going to see how this does. And it was so funny because I got so many messages from quilters who were like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited you're doing this. I used to needlepoint. Like, I feel like that's the thing. When you're into a hobby such as needlepoint, then you might like to do quilting or knitting,
dabbled in knitting or
all the things.
Yes,
and so it's so funny because a lot of my customers were like, I haven't done this in 10 to 20 years. I'm so excited to pick this back up again. And then I kind of just started. My second launch focused on some of the quilts in my book that I published, which I can show a few. I know
I would love to see that.
Audio people.
Yeah. So Kristi's just gonna grab her. So you're gonna show the quilt or the book? Oh, you've got the actual quilt. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So what I should do is maybe do a couple screenshots and put these on our Instagram feed too. But this is very cool. So I do recognize the exact colors and pattern of that quilt.
Yes. So that was from it's a pink ombre that goes to gray ombre quilt that was in my book, Southwest Modern. And then here are the canvases. Here's the sunglass case. So I've got the 2 colorways.
Yes. And I think what's very cool about a lot of Kristi's designs, particularly these that are related to quilt patterns, are that there's a lot of open space for stitches. And also great for beginners because this particular design, in fact, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they are on 13 count mesh, right?
They are on 13.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
being on 13 count mesh, being wide open spaces, really allow for a beginner to really get their chops with continental or basket weave stitching. And then also if you want to try a stitch, they all kind of line up in sections. And so you can do a stitch, you can do vertical stitches, horizontal stitches, diagonal stitches. So yeah, I think that's a very cool
Yeah.
sort of add-on to the already
Yes.
very cool designs. So
Yeah.
so that was good. So do you have another one there for us? Did you
I
say, or that's
do.
the only
I
one?
do. No, no, no. I've got a few others. So this one, the next one is the
Ooh.
Cascade quilt, and this was actually my first quilt pattern. So this is what launched the and this is a big colorful striped rainbow.
Wow. Okay, so it almost does have a little bit of a Southwest flair to it as well. And I don't know if it's supposed to, if it's
just
but
a little. I mean, just a little, but yeah.
pretty modern, but very the rainbow is beautiful.
Yeah.
Let's
And
see
then
the fabric
here's
on the back too. Can I see the fabric? Oh, cool. So is
so
that
there it is.
fabric on the back
So
inspired by
this
your
is
pattern?
fabric. Yeah. No, this is just a solid piece of fabric.
Oh, wow. So it's very
It's
like triangular. I don't know how else to explain that, but it's really cool. It almost looks tie-dyed or something.
it is. It's kind of geometric and it varies in the colors. That is by a fabric company called Alexander. I think it's Alexander Henry.
Okay.
It's the fabric company. They have amazing stuff.
You know, it would be interesting for us to take a look at some of those fabrics for finishing of your pieces. I don't know if you've got any of that or if you have any resources for people to find that, but it would be kind of cool to link.
Yeah.
So because, you know, when we're doing like eyeglass cases or if we make it a clutch, it would be cool to be the lining or something, those fabrics that you essentially created the pattern for the fabric. If I remember hearing you right at the beginning.
Yes.
You were using the fabrics and created the pattern for the quilt.
Yeah.
And then,
yeah. Absolutely. But yeah, and then here's the Cascade finish as a pillow.
Very pretty.
And it's on 13 count. And this is a really good stash buster because it's just one, you know, you can just pull whatever you have in your stash.
It's a really good stash buster or a very shop friendly canvas because you're going to need how many different colors?
I know.
You're going to need like
exactly.
what, 25 skeins of silk and ivory? Is it 32?
Yeah, it's 32. Yeah,
Oh
it's 32.
Oh my gosh. Perfect.
Let's see. And then the other one, this is the one I love this quilt because this is it's constructed out of the quilt block is flying geese.
Okay.
So the quilt pattern is called Migration. And this is the flying geese.
Oh, very cool.
It starts off in light blue, it goes to dark blue. And this is the quilt that I used for my son's, my youngest, for his like monthly photos.
So sweet. So for people who are just listening, the quilt looks like there's triangles, but the way they're formed, to Kristi's kind of, I think, you purposefully migration, you know, when geese fly, they look like kind of like triangles flying through the air. And so they kind of look like, and I didn't know that that's what that was called, but now I totally see the migration, quote unquote. So that's very cool. Yeah. Let's see the needlepoint now. Yeah. Very cool.
And then I have it so this is the blue, and then I have it in a pink colorway too. So
that's a whole, I'm so glad we're having this conversation because it really gives me a whole different perspective to hear the story behind the piece, the geese and the migration. I mean, I think the pattern is cool, but it really adds a layer when you actually know what it's called.
Yeah. Thank you.
So are your canvases called the same thing as the quilts? So is Migration the name of the canvas?
Yes. So all the needlepoint canvases based on my quilt designs have the same name.
Very cool.
They have the same name.
So you did, I don't know how many I took a look at your site to kind of get an idea of your whole collection, but the quilt patterns are now probably almost getting close to being outnumbered by non-quilt pattern.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Yeah. So you've got maybe, I don't know, how many quilt pattern canvases are there in your line?
So in my line, I have, I think 14 like standalone patterns.
Okay. And I was going to say 20, so I wasn't too far off.
So you're close because I had 14, I think I have 14 standalone. And then in my book, I had 18 projects.
Oh, okay.
So it was like 30. I think
Okay.
30 total, close to 30.
And then one of my favorites, like I said, is Hot Mess. It's a small 13 count, almost appears to be a patch. I've thought about putting it like a patch on a jean jacket. It would be,
I
like,
should,
hey, welcome, here I am.
yeah,
I'm a hot mess.
yes,
You're like the
100%.
hello, my name is, but you just put the Hot Mess label on instead. Um,
Yeah.
so what of your line can you say is your best seller?
Oh, for sure, the hot mess.
Okay.
The hot mess is a bestseller. Um, the Cascade was a bestseller,
The
and
rainbow
then
cascade that we
the
saw just a
Rainbow
minute ago.
Cascade,
Uh-huh.
and
Uh-huh.
then now, because this past fall, I introduced a new artist under my line, Catherine Carty.
Yes. Thank you for bringing that up. I had forgotten
Yeah,
about that. I'm so sorry. And what was her name
yeah,
again?
Catherine Carty,
Okay.
and
And go ahead.
she's a watercolor illustrator artist. Her stuff's amazing. So she's from Fort Worth. And so I stumbled upon her on Instagram. I can't remember how. I don't know if a friend sent me her work or if I just saw it, but I really loved her style. And
Mhm.
I reached out to her to say, hey, I would love to collaborate. Would you be interested? And she was like, absolutely. And so
I'm
that's
always
kind of how,
shocked when I hear a needlepoint designer say, yeah, that collaboration, they didn't want to have their work in needlepoint because if I'm thinking about this the right way, they really have already done all the work and now they're just going to
yeah,
collect a licensing check.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yes.
You know,
100%. It's like free, it's free money.
so you're going to someone and saying, I love your art, which is a compliment. And then you're saying, I'd like to pay you a little bit of every little thing that I sell of yours to be able to put this on needlepoint. And so it's an honor, I would think, for someone to be able to offer their art to a different industry, which I think is pretty cool
Yeah.
too. So
Yeah.
you said she's out
Yeah.
of Fort Worth.
Yeah, she's been great to work with. And usually what I do, I have another artist that I'm introducing at market for spring
Nice.
market. But my process is I approach them, I say, this is the breakdown. Like I give them the wholesale percentage, like this is what you'll get your commission for wholesale, and this is your commission for retail. I basically like to approach somebody and just be like, here's all the information. So they
Yep.
have everything in front of them to make a decision.
Hmm.
And then
Hmm.
she sends me her files, high res, and then I take them and translate it. Like I chart it out on MacStitch, and then
Hmm.
I send her what I've done, and I get approval from her before I even send it to the painting studio, because I feel like it's important that the artist gets to have a say in what the final outcome is. And
A
like
hundred
me as a
percent.
designer, that's what you do. That's common courtesy. So I really, it's not just you only hear from me once a quarter when I send you your sales report. Like, I'm always where I like to have a really good relationship with the people that I'm working with, and Catherine's been amazing.
I love
She's
that.
been really
So
great.
as I recall, my favorite of hers is the nutcracker with the peppermint.
Yes,
What are those
the
called? I just
sweets,
forgot. Yeah, the
the
little
peppermint,
candies. I don't know,
yeah, the peppermint candy.
the little starbursts or whatever you call those, like the little in the corners. And then I
Yes.
know there's a trio of nutcrackers. So mostly hers is related to Christmas. Is there anything
So she,
that's not?
yeah, so if you can see back here, actually, she has. So we did a line of boots, cowboy boots.
Oh,
Um,
sure. Oh, how
so here's
cute.
like, and this is beaded. If you can see, it's a
Oh
green cowboy
my
boot.
goodness. So Kristi's
Uh,
sharing with us, it's a cowboy boot that has sort of a green design along, what do you call that? Like the shaft of the boot? I don't know. There must
yeah.
be a name for that part. And the design is beaded. And then have you used maybe some velvet or something for the bottom? I don't
Uh,
know.
I think the bottom. So this was not stitched by me. This was stitched
Okay.
by a fabulous gal who works at the Needleworks, Corinne. Corinne, she is an amazing stitcher. So I think she did interlacing goblet stitch on this. I don't know. It was what did she use for this?
That's
It
really
wasn't
pretty.
pepper pot. I can't remember what she
That's
used.
okay. That's all right. I
Um,
was just trying to see if there was some texture on that. So are there,
yeah,
so being not in the South, I am not always drawn to cowboy boot designs, which is
I-
probably why I didn't remember that you had that as part of
fair
your
enough.
line.
Fair
But
enough.
so are there different designs on the top of the boot and then different colors, or is there just one design, or how does that,
So I
canvas
have
wise?
canvas wise, there is a blue boot, a pink boot, and the green, and they're all different designs on the top, and then the bottom of the boot is also different. So the pink one is like an ostrich
Oh, fun.
finish on the bottom. So
Okay.
and then the blue, I can't remember what the finish is on the bottom. So it's very Texas. Like if you are a boot fan, then you know the styles when you see them.
If you know,
And then
you know.
if you know, you know. And I'm not describing it well, but that's okay. And then she has we did a line of butterflies too,
Oh,
and those have
yes,
been a
those are
really
hers
good
too.
seller.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
And I think I just saw somewhere on social media a heart butterfly. Am I making
Yes,
that up? Okay,
that is no, you're not making it up. So that actually just got released today. So that's an exclusive with Faison at Novella.
awesome.
And she had requested because Faison had the exclusive on the butterflies and we released them, and then she came back and was like, "Hey, could Catherine do a butterfly for Valentine's?" And Catherine was like, "Why didn't I think of this before? Of course I could do
Darling.
this." So
Well, you know what? That also illustrates a really good point that when you introduce your artwork to a different type of audience, the collaborative ideas just kind of spring forth. So that's really great. I love that.
yeah, yeah, it's been really great.
And what is her, I should have asked, but Catherine's sort of medium, I guess is the right way to say it. What is she using her artwork for? Is it on stationery or is it prints or
It's
uh
print, so she has a line. So she's it's her medium's watercolor, and then she's turned it into um prints, like watercolor prints, and then she's got wrapping paper,
okay.
stationery. She does calligraphy, so sometimes she does Christmas cards as well.
Oh wow.
I mean, her stuff is incredible. It's beautiful. So you guys definitely go look her stuff up.
Check that
And then
out.
she like her
Absolutely.
cowboy boots. She has playing cards created for her
Oh,
cowboy boots.
how fun.
And then she's got acrylic ornaments for her I think her butterflies and her cowboy boots. Like she's
Awesome.
got so much. And then a calendar. She has a
Awesome.
yearly calendar. Like she's so talented.
Awesome. So your new artist will be released at Spring Market in March, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And no teaser here. We're keeping
No,
that a
well,
secret.
so she did, her name's Jacinda, and she's out of the Dallas area as well. So I actually have, this is her first, so she's the one who did this
Oh,
flower,
yes, that's beautiful. The flower heart. And that
the
just came
flower
out.
heart. That kid
That's
just came out like this a couple of weeks ago. So you've got it in
okay.
13 count. I think it's 8x8, and then the 18 count is 5x5.
And for audio
Um,
listeners who have not seen this design, it's a heart with it looks like roses and maybe small daisies
yes,
of some sort. Or
roses and yeah, some
okay,
daisies, and then just like the greenery.
they form a heart, and then there's the square pink background. So you really could you could stitch it without the background and make a shape of
Mhm.
like a heart, but that light pink background is very pretty and offsets
Yeah,
the design really
yeah,
well.
yeah,
Very cool.
and it was the same thing. So I knew Jacinda. I don't think we ever met personally, but I've been following her on Instagram for a long time. She was part of Prudent Baby, I think back in the day when it was a blog.
Oh,
I think it was
I'm
called.
not familiar with that.
It was a pretty popular blog, and then she's always done watercolor, and so she did this in acrylic, and so she did this series of these paintings on Pantone color cards. So
Oh,
she took like
cool.
a physical Pantone card, and it had
Yes.
and it had like the Pantone number on the bottom of it, and then she painted whatever she was painting, and she did a series of flowers.
So the square outline, what behind that would have been the Pantone card,
That was
and then the
yeah,
artwork. That makes a lot of sense.
that
Okay,
she did
very
on top
cool.
of it, and she did a whole bunch of them, and I again saw, and I was like, this would be amazing translated to canvas. And
Hmm.
I reached out to her and I was like, hey, if you're interested. And she was like, yeah, sounds great. And so we are doing, so her flower hearts are the first thing, and then I have a lot, I think there's like 5 or 6 canvases that will release at market of
Okay.
the continuation of like the Pantone series, and I'm really excited for it.
That's
So
very cool. I hadn't, again, I'm glad to have that information because at first I thought, well, why is there a square behind? I mean, it's cool and it offsets but that really tells the whole story then once you know that.
yeah,
So very cool.
yeah, her use of color is amazing. And I think that's what I was like really drawn to with her work was and her style is completely different from Catherine's too.
For sure.
So
I can see that.
um, it's just, but her use of color with her design is just, it's so pretty. It's
And,
so,
frankly, both of those artists that you've chosen are very different from your art too. So
yes.
in the line, nothing's really competing. It's very interesting the way you've
And
chosen.
it's, yeah, well, thank you. I, I chose them because I love their stuff
For sure.
so much, and it's totally different from mine. And they all bring their own design style to the table.
Very good. So do you have anything of your own coming out at market, or are you really just releasing?
I do. Where did I have it? I think I pulled a little sample. I do. I think I have like 30 new things coming out.
Wow,
It's nuts.
that's so exciting.
It's not so much for my bank account right now, but
Oh, that's hard. It's hard because, as people may or may not know, in the needlepoint industry, you have to really project your inventory management. And this is no different than any other retail environment. But you're kind of building up to this big release twice a year.
yes,
For the most
yes,
part.
yeah,
And so you're gathering all this inventory, and the excitement of releasing it is great, but the terrifyingness, is there a better word than
yes.
that?
It's
The amount of
yes.
terror that you're harboring,
Mhm.
and hoping that these designs are going to sell it's a lot. It's a lot. But again, it's no different than any other retail environment. It's just like owning a gift shop and buying all the holiday, 6 months in advance, and not releasing that holiday until just
Yeah.
before. So,
It's a lot of back end work of looking at your numbers and kind of figuring out, okay, cash flow, what's my cash flow right now?
mhm,
Some of my decisions, I use different painting studios. Some require 100% payment up front.
mhm.
Some are like, you don't have to pay them until the canvases come in.
On delivery,
Others,
sure.
yeah,
Mhm,
on delivery, some are 50% deposit. And it's like a total numbers game sometimes
mhm.
for me, of like, who am I going to use to paint this? Because I look at my cash flow and I'm like, what do I have in the bank versus how am I going to order? And then it is, inventory is a guessing game, because sometimes you feel like, oh, this isn't going to sell well, and then it sells out, and then you need to order more, which is always a good problem to have. But I
Well,
don't like
and
being
I was
sold
trying
out
to
of things.
relate it to other industries, but the difference in our industry is that the product replacement is a little bit longer of a process. So you can't
Yeah.
just, call the printer and print up 25 more sets of a
Yes.
greeting card, for example. You're really relying on human resource to produce your product, which is amazing in a lot of ways in our industry, but it's also the reason why things aren't replenishable. And so,
Yeah.
to your point, I think we get a bad rap for being, this is just a hobby, but the truth is there's a lot of business that goes into if you're running a good business, and I know you are, and I will speak for myself, but we are a small business and I rely on this income. It's not just for
Yeah.
fun for me. And
Yeah.
so this is definitely something that I um take very seriously.
Yes.
So, yes.
Yes.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah, is there anything else you want to tell us about your line that we haven't talked about yet?
I think my line it's very beginner friendly.
I agree with that.
Um, I am releasing more 18 mesh canvases because people have requested it for all the hardcore 18 mesh people. I'm like, I
Yep.
see you, I hear you. I'm
Yeah.
slowly releasing. That's why now I do like Jacinda's stuff and Catherine's stuff is on 18 or 13. So it's kind of like choose your own adventure.
Mhm.
If you feel like being spicy and want to do an 18 count, 18 mesh, there you go. I like both for different reasons.
I'm the
Um,
same, and I don't want to be self-promoting, but I'm just going to tell you on the flip. So I also have a wholesale line, the Gingham Stitchery, with a lot of different artists, and our feedback at market was that we needed more 13 count mesh. So it's coming on both
so
sides, girl,
funny.
isn't it?
That's,
Yeah.
of
So
course, it's
you
like you can't please anybody, but
You
that's
can't
okay.
please
You
all the
can't please
people all the
everyone.
time. That's exactly right. And so don't be too hard on yourself. It's just, I think what that says is that your canvases are relatable or inspiring to a large number of stitchers who have a lot of different interests. So that's
Oh, well, thank you.
good. Yeah.
That makes me very happy to hear. I
Yeah.
love being in this industry. Like I love meeting all the different stitchers, all the
Mhm.
designers, the shop owners. Like, I feel like we're all in this together. Everybody is in this together. Like a rising tide lifts all boats. Like
Love that.
we're here to support each other. Everyone runs their business differently, but I love the support that people give us.
For sure.
Financial, on the back, on the back end side and like front facing side.
I agree. It's a very supportive industry. And, you know, I think it's fair to say I've never really done my research on what small business definition is, but for the most part, we're all small business owners, many of which are women, and we're all kind of supporting each other's small businesses. So it's a cool place to
Yeah.
be for sure, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, this has been super fun. I think we've
Thanks.
covered all the bases.
Yeah. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
yes,
Thank
and
you.
so if you are okay, this is gonna be, I'm gonna see if I can say this right. If you are a lover of canceled plans, sorry,
That's also another good bestseller.
I love that. I love that canvas. And I was gonna say maybe this weekend you can cancel some plans and do some stitching, and hopefully you're
Yes.
stitching while you listen to this. And
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
so Kristi has this darling canvas that says "Lover of Canceled Plans," and I've seen it recently with some heart darning patterns in the background, and it's
Yes.
absolutely
Yes.
darling. So
Yeah.
for those of us who love to have an open schedule, I hope everybody gets some time to stitch this weekend, and maybe they'll have
Yes.
some time to stitch one of Kristi's canvases. So if you're
Absolutely.
joining us just for the first time, thank you for popping in. I introduced myself at the front, so I don't need to introduce myself at the back. But what I am hoping you all will do is, if whichever platform you happen to be listening to us on, whether it's YouTube or one of the audio platforms, please subscribe so that we can continue to put good stuff out there and continue to maintain this platform. So, Kristi, thank you. Have a great
Thank you, Megan.
weekend, and
Thank you so much.
we'll see everybody again then the next time. Bye.